Hey guys, and welcome to another Shadow Priest viewer analysis video. Today we're going to be looking at a Halls of Atonement plus 19 that Knob sent in to me from my Discord. So shout out to Knob, thanks for sending this in, my friend. Basically what Knob said in their DM to me was that they're trying to break 7k overall DPS, and they are having a hard time doing it, right? For instance, in this 19 Halls of Atonement, they ended up doing 6.8k overall. So they're trying to find ways to maximize DPS, right? So I figured I would take a look, sure. So the very first thing that I like to do, as always, let me back out of this so I can show you what it would typically look like. You pull up the logs and it would look like this. Their logs say they did 6.4k, but their details at the end of the dungeon showed 6.8. That's probably because this is taking out spiteful damage, I think. But honestly, there's no spiteful damage right there, and this was on a spiteful Grievous week, right? Honestly, the difference doesn't matter too much, but what I like to do when I first take a look at people's logs, especially in Mythic Plus, is I like to click on their name, and I click on Summary. So this is that page that I had up before. Because there is a lot of stuff, like I've said in other videos, there's a lot of stuff that you can do before the run even starts that will give you a better starting place, right? So if you have better gear, for instance, or a lot of sockets, or the right enchants and conduits and all that stuff, good stat weights, all these things will make your chances of doing more damage higher and make stuff a lot easier for you, right? So I'm going to just take a look real quick at this person's outside of the dungeon stuff, which is basically this character sheet right here, and then we'll watch the video. So, first things first, we're going to look at these talents, and you'll notice that this person is running Fortress of the Mind. This is an interesting choice here. So typically, in Mythic Plus dungeons, most Shadow Priests will run Death and Madness, but this person chose to run Fortress of the Mind. Now, there are situations where Fortress of the Mind might be a better choice, and Fortress of the Mind is definitely going to increase your single target damage, right? Because Death and Madness does pretty much nothing on boss fights when there's nothing for you to snipe with Shadow Word Death, right? Whereas Fortress of the Mind is going to make your Mind Flay and Mind Blast deal 10% more damage and generate more insanity, right? So your single target damage, I would expect, just by playing this talent instead of Death and Madness, is going to be higher than if you were playing Death and Madness, right? Although, on a Fortified Spiteful Grievous week and in Halls of Atonement, I figure that I would probably run Death and Madness here, just for the Shadow Word Death snipes on the Spiteful mobs, so that you can get more Insanity gen. But it's probably not the biggest DPS loss, but I definitely think this is the second best choice in this row, I would say. I think, again, Death and Madness would be a better choice here. But then the rest of your talents all look good. So you've got Body and Soul, Searing Nightmare, Shadow Crash. All of these, from Body and Soul down, are the ones that I would be running as well in Halls of Atonement. I will mention that you're playing Naya instead of Karain this week, and this makes things a little weird, especially with how your stat weights are, but I'll get to that in a second. Pretty much everybody who's doing really high fortified keys, like a 19 fortified, would suggest that you play Karain instead, specifically for the first strike soulbind ability, right? Naya's Tool's Poison is not going to give you very much, and first strike would give you a lot of critical strike, right? Which just makes it so that your trash damage is a lot higher, because your Searing Nightmares will crit more often, your Shadow Crash will crit more often. That's like why you play Ancient Madness as well, is for this big crit strike chance increase at the beginning of Void Form. Same idea goes into why you would play First Strike. So yeah, playing Naya here, interesting choice. not the worst thing you could be doing. Um, and maybe you haven't done the campaign and so you don't have Karain unlocked or something like that. In which case I would say do the campaign. um, but if you do have Karain unlocked, I would say you should be playing Karain here instead of Naya. Um, but yeah, then after that, you've got pretty good conduits. You're playing Rabid Shadows instead of Dissonant Echoes, which I think is the correct choice because it's a high fortified key, so you're going to be using Mindbender a lot, so you want a lot of Mindbender damage, right? But the main reason I think this is here is because you see a lot of other Shadow Priests who play Rabid Shadows in these high fortified keys, but those other Shadow Priests are playing Karain, where they only get a single potency conduit, whereas with Naya you have two potency conduits, right? So Haunting Apparitions as your second potency conduit, because you're playing Naya, is okay, but with this build, with Shadow Crash, Searing Nightmare, Ancient Madness, you're not really looking to do a lot of apparition damage, so this is probably not a great choice. Rabid Shadows, again, I think is the correct choice, but then either Dissonant Echoes or Haunting Apparitions here isn't going to be a huge difference because you don't really need this second potency conduit here. The only thing it will do is maybe you're building a little bit towards boss damage, right? So you've got all your trash talents for trash, I mean, not that they're bad. But you're playing Fortress of the Mind and Haunting Apparitions. Maybe what you're trying to do is get the best of both worlds and do a lot of trash damage, but also make sure your single target damage is pretty high for bosses, which is not a horrible idea. And then if we look at these stats right here, your stats are really interesting. They're off from what most people would say. So you're playing high haste, which is correct, and then crit is your second highest, and then you've got very low mastery and a decent amount of verse actually. And a lot of people will say that haste mastery is what you should go for, just because it's best on single target, and it's also really good in AoE and Mythic Plus situations. For a long time, especially near the beginning of the expansion, people were saying that haste and crit, even when Shadowflame Prism first became really good, and people were like, oh, actually, this is the right legendary we should be using. A lot of people were saying that haste crit is still our go-to stat weights for Mythic Plus. But I don't know how much I agree with that, especially when you're playing Ancient Madness, and if you had First Strike, you're getting so much crit passively from your talents and your soulbinds that having a lot of base crit doesn't really matter, and you're better off having a lot of mastery. Because another thing is when you have really high mastery, it means that during your void forms, where you get full value of your mastery on every target, you're going to be doing, so let's say you've got 10% mastery or something. If you pop void form, you're doing 30% increased damage to every target you hit. But if you have 15% mastery, then when you pop void form, you're doing 45% more damage to every target you hit, right? So mastery scales really, really well, especially when you're going for these big void form window builds, right? So I would maybe look at swapping your stats on some of these pieces of gear, right? Like these legs, probably swap these out for the ones from the other side that are haste mastery. This belt is fine. This chest piece, probably try to find a haste mastery one. And then your rings, yeah, like this ring. I think this is the one I was running for a long time, or maybe I'm still running this one. But yeah, basically, like you have really high crit, and so you would prefer to have a lot of mastery than crit. But I don't know how much that's gonna. Obviously, that'll play a part in your damage, right? But what can you say? So this is what you've got to do. This is what you have to work with, I mean. And when I looked at your Raider IO, it said you've only killed 2 of the 10 bosses on Mythic, so I'm guessing you don't have a super easy way of getting more better statted gear, right? Other than like farming a bunch of Mythic Plus or something. So I don't blame you too much for working with what you've got. And you're also running Unbound Changeling, which is maybe the only other option you have. If you've killed Sire Denathrius, though, on Heroic, you should be trying to get a Hymnal here instead of the Changeling. Okay, and then the last things I'll say about your character page. You don't have a single socket. I've mentioned this a bunch of times to a bunch of people. Sockets are a passive way to increase your DPS. All you got to do is do the Maw every day. It takes me about 45 minutes, and I get about 1.2k Stygia every day. And in 6 days, you'll have enough for a socket, right? So you just do that for up until 9.1 drops, and you'll have a bunch of sockets here. And they just give you stats, right? So you're just going to do more damage. You also died one time during the key. That's bad. Okay, so let's take a look at this video. I'm going to mute it just in case there's anything. So I'll mention before we start, your UI is pretty interesting. It's got a you've got a lot of like this stuff is like the Blizzard default stuff. Your map is the default for Blizzard. And then you've got like the character models for people and stuff like that, and you're showing everybody's buffs. I don't know if this is really necessary, right? Like, do you really need to know that this rogue has both his poisons applied? Is that something that you're constantly checking and you tell him when they're not applied, right? If that's the case, and this guy like has a habit of not applying these, then yeah, I would track this stuff and remind him every so often, right? But like, you don't need to see that everybody has Power Word Fortitude on them, and you don't need to see that this guy's running his Augment Rune. There's a bunch of stuff on here that is pretty much unnecessary. But it's personal preference. If this is the way you like to play, then so be it, right? Oh, I will also mention your transmog is sick. I really, really like it. Okay, so then let's hit play. So you mount up at the beginning. That's good. I like to start every key mounted up. I think you're playing on like an ultra high definition or ultra wide monitor, because that load screen was really like wonky looking, and I've only ever seen that on ultra wide monitors. Something that you could do differently here, I mentioned this to a lot of people. As these guys are getting pulled by the tank and they're making their way over, you can start hitting them right now. You don't have to wait for them to be all grouped up, but only if you're going to hit Fade, right? So Fade resets your aggro, and it makes it so you don't generate threat, right? So you want to start hitting these things as they're running in. That's a great opportunity for you to put Vampiric Touches on a couple things. And then as they get grouped up, as you start to build up aggro on these, you fade, and then as they get grouped up, you transition into your big cooldown windows, right? So I would probably get a little bit closer, dismount, put Vampiric Touch on a couple things, start your big windows, right? So you guys lust this pull. You pop Fey Guardians. What was it you just clicked right there? You clicked something. If we go back to right here, oh, you clicked your pot. So you don't. It looks like you don't have your health pot or your combat potion bound to a hotkey. Also, if I am reading this correctly, you don't have Psychic Scream bound to a hotkey either. Those are all things that you should have bound. Same with your Health Stone. That way you don't have to move your mouse down here and click it and then keep playing like you just did. Anyway, so you go into your Void Eruption. You're doing some Searing Nightmare spam. That's good. And then pretty much just Searing Nightmare. You should be casting a Shadow Crash here. There it goes. Yeah, this is not horrible. You're doing pretty good damage on this opener, like 30k, not bad. You're being targeted by one of these Spitefuls. And then something that is less important for you because you're playing Naya, but would be important for somebody who is playing Karain. And also, that's something else I have to keep in mind. I was going to say you should snipe these Gargans with Shadow Word Death, but because you're not playing Death and Madness, you shouldn't be sniping them with Shadow Word Death. You should use Shadow Word Death to do extra damage when something's in execute range, right? But you shouldn't be like looking to snipe stuff with Shadow Word Death because it's not going to reset because you don't have Death and Madness. So okay, so then I would like to see a Shadow Crash come out here. I would like you to stop putting Vampiric Touch on all this stuff. You've got what, 6 targets right here? So Vampiric Touch on all this stuff isn't horrible, but Searing Nightmare would get some really good value right here, especially after you just barely popped your Void Form. Also, I don't know what's going on with your apparitions and yourself. Why is it that when you're in Void Form, all this stuff turns gray instead of being purple? I actually kind of like it. It just looks really funky. It makes some other stuff more visible though, like this Mind Seer line is more visible. I wonder if it's like a graphics card thing or what. Anyway, so you're casting Mind Seer, Searing Nightmare a bunch. Your Fey Guardians just came off cooldown. You're getting chased by a couple of these Spitefuls as you guys finish off this pack. These Gargans they need to die, so you should be ignoring the Spitefuls until these Gargans die. And then you can, pat on the Spitefuls or whatever if you want to. And I don't know if you've Shadow Word Death a single time yet, but a Shadow Word Death right here on this Gargan would be good. It does good damage, especially when stuff is in execute range. Here you're putting Vampiric Touch on everything again. You get 1 Searing Nightmare off. Okay, then you get 2 more. Then you pop your Shadow Crash. More Searing Nightmares. You stun the Spiteful that's coming towards you. That's good. And then back into Searing Nightmare spam. You haven't used your Fey Guardians at all since it came off cooldown. So you could have a Void Form ready right now for this Prideful, but you don't because you haven't used your Fey Guardians. That's something that I would look at doing. It's nice to have Fey Guardians for when you first enter Void Form because you are playing Naya. Fey Guardians is going to give you a big boost to your mastery, which you could use all the mastery you could get right now. Oh, and you have a Vampiric Embrace announcer, so you use your Vampiric Embrace. That's nice. I just saw it in the party chat. But yeah, you could use all the mastery you could get, so having Fey Guardians for your Void Form would be nice, but also you don't want to lose any casts of Fey Guardians over the course of the key, and a lot of times you're better off pressing it just while Void Form is on cooldown so that you can get it up faster for the next pack or whatever. Right here, there are 4 targets, so I would put Vampiric Touch on all of them. Right now, you should be getting into Void Form immediately. Okay, so I'll mention something real quick about this. As you go into this pack, let's go back to like 325. This is probably a little far back. Let's go back to right here. So this upcoming pack, let's talk about it a little bit. Also, I definitely think that this is a graphics thing with your graphics card. So you've got 4 mobs right here, and one is a priority mob, for sure. The Shard of Halkias is by far the most deadly thing in this pack, right? So most of your damage should be going into the Shard, and you should cleave down all this other stuff. Because it's just 4 things, you could put Vampiric Touch on everything. That'd be a good idea. And then you need to... The way I would like to see you play this is put Vampiric Touch on everything, starting with the small guys and ending with the Shard, just so that when you tab to the Shard, you put your Vampiric Touch on it, you're immediately targeting it so you can keep hitting it with stuff. And then I would pop Fey Guardians, 1 Mind Blast. No, I would pop Fey Guardians, and then I would press your Mindbender, and then 1 Mind Blast, 1 Shadow Word Death, but reverse those 2, so it'd be Shadow Word Death and then Mind Blast. And then get into Void Form immediately. And then as soon as you're in Void Form, the next global should be a Void Bolt so that you get extra damage on this Shard. And then a Shadow Crash, and then Searing Nightmare spam is what I would like to see. And you can also weave in some Mind Blasts, right? Because it's 4 targets, so you're going to get really good value out of your Mindbender with Shadow Flame Prism. So I would do, like I said, I would do Void Eruption, Void Bolt, Shadow Crash, a couple Searing Nightmares, a Mind Blast, a couple Searing Nightmares, a Mind Blast, that kind of thing, right? So instead, as we go into this next pack, you put Vampiric Touch on 3 of them, and then you start Searing Nightmare. And then you pop your Fey Guardians, you pop your Mindbender, you hit your Shadow Word Death, you hit your Mind Blast, and then a Shadow Crash, right? This Shadow Crash should wait until after your Void Eruption so that you get all the crit that you can from your Ancient Madness talent. It's just going to make this more likely to crit and do a ton of damage, right? And it'll do even more damage because you'll have full value of your Mastery when you're in Void form, right? So this Shadow Crash should wait until after you, like I said, after you press Void Eruption. So right here, you Void Erupt, the very next global should be that Shadow Crash that just went out, and then you can start this Mind Seer thing. But also I would send off one Void Bolt, but then you can start this Searing Nightmare spam. You get 2 Mind Blasts back to back right here. A lot of people like to do that. I'm not entirely sure why people are so insistent on pressing Mind Blast back to back like that. The other thing you need to keep in mind is you need to cast another Searing Nightmare here before these Shadow Word Pains fall off, because if you get a Searing Nightmare, if you cast Searing Nightmare when everything already has Shadow Word Pain on it, they're going to take increased damage from the Searing Nightmare. It's like 200% more damage or something. If you let these Shadow Word Pains fall off, the Searing Nightmare is going to do half that damage, and it's going to reapply Shadow Word Pain, right? So you want to make sure that Shadow Word Pain doesn't fall off of everything before this next Searing Nightmare. And you manage to do that, right? So kicking these Curses of Obliteration would be really nice. And then your Vampiric Touch has fallen off of this shard. At this point, everything's dead except for the shard. You should be single targeting this shard down. Spamming Searing Nightmare on this stuff, while it will make your damage overall look better, it's worse because the shard is going to live longer, which means the key is going to take longer, which means your overall damage is actually going to be lower because your damage per second, I mean, because there are more seconds in your key because it takes longer, right? So you should be single targeting this guy down, especially because you're not playing Karain. If you're playing Karain, then there's an argument to be made that you should get first strike procs from these Spiteful Shades and use those to carry your damage into the shard. But because you're not playing Karain, you should be single targeting this guy down. Instead, you're casting a Mind Seer and you're doing some Searing Nightmare spam. So that's just straight up padding. You outrange this Thrash, that's good. The Shadow Crash is fine, I guess. A Shadow Word Death right here would be good as you move. You're out of range again. So that's one thing I'll mention already as like a repeated behavior that you have. You need to get used to killing stuff with Shadow Word Death and not be afraid of the return damage that it deals to you. That's something that your healer can worry about. Also, this guy who like sits up there and is flying, I wish Blizzard would fix that so bad. It's like the easiest thing, and it happens all the time. Anyway, so yeah, so I would say something that I've picked up from just watching the very first 5 minutes of this key, right, is that you need to work on killing stuff with Shadow Word Death. Work on casting Shadow Word Death. Like that guy, the circle mob right now, you should hit it with a Shadow Word Death. It seems like so far you've only been using Shadow Word Death to generate Shadow Flame Rifts with your Legendary and your Mindbender, right? Which is not a horrible use of Shadow Word Death, but it's not the only use of Shadow Word Death. And if you only ever use Shadow Word Death while you have Mindbender up, you're gonna lose like 3 out of every 4 casts of your Shadow Word Death. Because Shadow Word Death is on a 15-second cooldown and your Mindbender is on a 1-minute cooldown, right? So if you just cast Shadow Word Death every time it's up, you'll cast it 4 times as often as you do cast Mindbender, right? If you use them both on cooldown. So yeah, that's something I would say. Keep an eye on that. You get into Void Eruption here, and you don't make very good use of your improved crit. I guess you get a couple Mindbender Shadow Flame Rifts, so that's not bad. But yeah, both your dots fell off of the shard for a while there. You should be using that Dark Thoughts as you move. Nice. You cast a Power Word Shield on yourself. You didn't need that. It's a wasted global. Another Dark Thoughts proc as you move is good. Devouring Plague. Your Vampiric Touch is about to fall off. That should never fall off on a single target. There you go. A Shadow Word Death right now would be great. A Shadow Word Death. Anytime. Shadow Word Death? Maybe? Any Shadow Word Deaths in the chat? No, not a single Shadow Word Death. So, again, you need to make better use of your Shadow Word Death, especially in situations where the thing is about to die anyway. So now your Mindbender's back up. You weren't targeting anything for a second there, so you were spamming buttons and nothing was going off. But that's an easy fix. You just need to recognize it as soon as it happens. It happens to me sometimes. I guess the easiest way to tell is if we go back here a little bit. If you watch this target frame right here. Oh, maybe I was wrong. Oh no, see, if you keep an eye on your target frame, you'll see right here, you're going to start trying to cast a Mind Blast, but you're targeting the rogue, right? So you can't Mind Blast your ally, so it's not going to work. So you just need to be aware of your target frame. It's not just here to look pretty, it's here to give you good information, right? So you'll be like, oh, my Devouring Plague's not going off. Why? It's because you're targeting the rogue. Okay, now you're finally targeting the pride, right? That's just something that, like I said, you'll have to recognize as soon as possible, and comes with practice, right? It's just something to be aware of. There are a lot of little things on your screen that you want to be looking at pretty often. Your eyes should be moving back and forth between a lot of stuff as you play. A lot of people will tunnel vision and just look at the mob that they're fighting and be like, oh yeah, or look down here at their spells and be like, nice, I'm pressing all the right spells. But then they're like, wait a second, I'm standing in a fiery pool, or I'm not dodging something coming from the side, or whatever, right? Right here, you're healing yourself a little bit with Shadow Word, with Shadow Mend, I mean. Oh, and that's when you die to the Prideful. Oh, and then you release, okay. Yeah, releasing there is probably the right choice instead of just waiting for a res, because you're right near the beginning anyway. So right now, you're doing 7.5k overall, 7.4k as you go into this fight. That's not bad. It could be a little bit higher though, especially if you land more Shadow Crashes right after your Void Eruptions. That's a big thing, right? It may not seem very big, but it's actually huge, right? So Shadow Crashes after your Void Eruptions, and also using your Shadow Word Death more liberally. And those are the two big things I've noticed so far. And then here you put Vampiric Touch on everything again, which is probably a waste of globals. And then you're getting back into your big cooldown window. Again, you cast a Shadow Crash before you got into Void form. We'll watch. So you put Vampiric Touch on 5 different things, and then they pulled in this extra Groundskeeper. You hit your Soul Letting Ruby on this guy, which means you're about to get a lot of crit, right? So you should be popping your Mindbender, which you're about to press, and then Shadow Word Death, Mind Blast, and then immediately cast Void Form, and then Shadow Crash, right? And the reasons for that are Ancient Madness, right? You're getting a ton of crit from Ancient Madness. You're going to get a bunch of crit from your Soul Letting Ruby just now. And then that means that your next Shadow Crash that you cast right as you enter Void form has a really high chance of critting. And critting a Shadow Crash, especially on this many targets, is going to do a lot of damage, right? It's a huge damage increase. Instead, you cast this Mindbender, Shadow Word Death, Mind Blast, and then you Shadow Crash. Like I've said before, that Shadow Crash should wait until this Void Eruption goes off. Now you Shadow Crash, right? And then after the Shadow Crash, you can start doing I would do 1 Mind Blast, Searing Nightmare, 1 more Mind Blast so that both charges are on cooldown, and then a bunch of Searing Nightmares. Instead, you do 2 Mind Blasts in a row, and then some Searing Nightmares. And honestly, this is not horrible damage, right? 16k DPS on this pull is not horrible. but it could be higher just from waiting a second for your Shadow Crash, right? And then you just have a bunch of spiteful guys that you need to finish killing. But I wouldn't worry too much about those because you have actual mobs to worry about. So you should be putting Vampiric Touch on these 3 guys, and then some Searing Nightmare. Use that Dark Thoughts proc as you move. So right now is a good time to use it. You've only got 3 targets, so... Oh, let's go back a little bit, because I think you had another targeting issue right there. Yeah. So, for some reason, you clicked on something. I think it was a Spiteful Shade that you clicked on. If you watch this targeting. So right now you're targeting this Spiteful Shade, probably to stun it, yeah. And then you're targeting a Gargan. And then you end up clicking on this Spiteful Shade right as it disappears. And it means that you're not targeting any of these guys. Which means that as you try to cast more spells, you're unable to, right? It's saying invalid target. You must be channeling Mindseer, right? Because you started targeting this. So that's, again, something you need to pay attention to and figure out as soon as it happens so that you can fix it. Really, it's an easy fix. You just press tab, right? Or you just click on a different target. It's not crazy hard. It's just something you have to recognize. Then here, it's important that you don't let your Shadow Word Pains fall off. And you don't. Nice. Very good. And then these Vampiric Touches are going to fall off, which is fine. Because probably put Vampiric Touch on these 2 guys again. Because they should be alive long enough. Your Mindbender is out right now, so you should be using your Mind Blasts and your Shadow Word Deaths to make rifts. And then, yeah, these guys are just going to end up dying pretty quickly. There's not a whole lot you can do here. You could have, if we go back just a little bit, your Shadow Word Death is about to come off cooldown. So you should kill one of these things with Shadow Word Death. Like now. Right now. Cast a Shadow Word Death and kill this guy. Right? Instead, you cast a Mind Flay, which is infinitely worse. Right? I'm not trying to be rude, not trying to say you're bad or anything. But a Mind Flay does so much less damage than a Shadow Word Death would do in that situation that you're better off not pressing anything, right? Okay, technically, you're not better off not pressing anything. The Mind Flay does do more than 0 damage, but it's so much worse than a Shadow Word Death. A Shadow Word Death right there would have been perfect. Plus, you've got 24 seconds left on your Mindbender anyway, so it's not like Shadow Word Deathing right there is going to mean you don't have Shadow Word Death up when your Mindbender's up, because it will be up. And then you're moving into this 4-pack. If you were playing Karain, again, I know you're not. If you were, you should hit these Spiteful Shades as you run by to get crit. Maybe even hit this Stoneborn before it gets turned to your side. But because you're not playing Karain, I'm just mentioning that so that in the future, if you do decide to play Karain, you'll know that that's what you should be doing. Maybe you already know that. But yeah, that's what you should be doing as you run across. Then you're going to go into this 4-pack, I think. These 2 Obliterators, the Collector and the Shard. As things get grouped up right here, you should be putting Vampiric Touch on everything. You could kick that circle guy. Yep, perfect. You should put a Vampiric Touch on the Shard for sure. You don't. And you Shadow Crash without being in Void Form. Also not good. You should be in Void Form right now. See, okay, so you're just now getting into Void Form, and this guy's at 27%, this guy's at 39%, this guy's at 44%. Pretty much everything here is about 50% HP or less, right? So these things may or may not live long enough for you to get full value out of your Void Form. If you're deciding to pop Void Form on a pack like this, you need to pop it at the beginning of the pack, right? Rather than at the end of the pack, so that you can get full value. Everything can be alive through your whole Void Form, right? Instead, you pop it right here at the end, and you're still going to get a couple of things alive throughout this Void Form, right? I would like to see a Shadow Crash ASAP. There you go. Your Vampiric Touch has fallen off of the Shard again, so re-upping that would be good. But then, yeah, like, you're still... Oh, you're not still in Void Form, but you're like at the end of your Void Form, and this guy's the only guy left. All in all, you're doing 9k to this pack right now, just barely losing to the Fire Mage. 9k is not horrible. 9k is pretty good, actually. You could be doing 12k though. 12k, 11k, maybe 13k if you got lucky with crits and stuff, right? So you're low for sure. But you are doing 7.9k overall right now, 8k even, which is not bad. And then, yeah, you should be single targeting this guy down. This is where your build is really going to shine, is in a single target situation like this. So your Mind Blasts, these are going to be doing more damage than most people's. A Shadow Word Death right now would be great. Shadow Word Death, please. Please, Shadow Word Death. That'd be awesome. One Shadow Word Death, please. No Shadow Word Deaths. Okay, so that's another instance where you could have used, and should have used, Shadow Word Death, right? And I also understand that, I'm not sure if this is a pug or your group that you run with all the time, but I can understand not wanting to Shadow Word Death because you're afraid of the return damage that it deals to you. But you have to get over that. That has to be your healer's problem, not yours, because Shadow Word Death, it's something that you should be aware of, and you should make sure that you don't kill yourself with it. 100% you should make sure. But it shouldn't be like, oh, it's looking kind of scary. I'm at 70% HP. I don't know if I should use a Shadow Word Death here. The answer is almost always you should. Like, even a Shadow Word Death there would have been good. Okay, so most groups will pull this middle pack right here. It looks like you guys are going to. This is a 5-pack. So Vampiric Touch on everything would be okay, except I'm not sure if the Fire Mage has Combust up or not. Right, so if the Fire Mage is going to combust this pack, then you're not going to have... Putting Vampiric Touch on everything is a waste of globals because stuff is going to die before you start getting into your serious damage. So if he is going to pop Combust on this pack, you should just put Vampiric Touch on maybe 1 or 2, and then get into Void Form, pop your Mind Bender, and start Searing Nightmare spamming so that you can get good value out of your globals, right? So we'll see what this Fire Mage ends up doing. Interestingly, it seems like there are very many packs where you Vampiric Touch everything except for one thing. So like this pack, the last pack, the pack before, you put Vampiric Touch on 4 of the 5 things, and then you don't put it on the last thing. Not entirely sure why that is. Maybe it's just timing. Like these guys end up being close together after you've put on 4. I don't know. But if you're gonna Vampiric Touch 4, you may as well do 5. Although I don't think doing 4 is even the right choice in this situation. And then, so you pop your Mind Bender, you pop your Mind Blast, you're going to do your big... see, that time was correct. So if we go back, it might be a little hard to see, but if you watch your Shadow Crash, lucky for you, maybe, it's on cooldown. So you can't use it before Void Form. Actually, I think it'll be up in time. So you Mind Bender, you Shadow Word Death, you Mind Blast, and then you immediately Void Form, Void Eruption, that's correct. And then you should Shadow Crash right as soon as you're in there, and you do. And if you watch the numbers right here, and watch yourself on the damage meter down here. Sorry, I keep going over the bar. You're at 9.9k right now. The Shadow Crash hits. It does 12k DPS. I mean 12.8k damage to every single target that it crits. And you're doing 13k DPS instantly, right? So right before this, at let's say 1220, you're doing 5.8k, 7k, 9k, and then the Shadow Crash hits, and you're doing 13k, right? That's how important it is to Shadow Crash as soon as you're into Void Form, especially if you're playing Ancient Madness. Because like I've said a couple times already, Shadow Crash, when it crits, is just a ton of damage. When it doesn't crit, it's a lot of damage. So if you can guarantee a crit or make your chances of critting really high, then you should be doing that. Right there is something interesting. If we go back just a little bit, you have this same targeting problem again. I don't know if maybe you're accidentally clicking on people or something. But if you watch this guy, you end up... Let's see when it happens. Yeah, so you end up clicking on this guy right here. This guy's the mage. You end up clicking on the mage as he runs by, which means that every time you press all these other abilities, nothing's going to happen, right? You end up Searing Nightmaring him. That's not helpful, right? You should be targeting these guys, but you fix it really quickly right here. So you lose very little. So not bad. But you've had that problem several times. So maybe, I don't know if maybe your mouse is like double clicking or something like that when you release. That might be something to look into. Whatever it is, it's happened enough that I've picked up on it several times, right? So keep an eye on that. Maybe look into what's causing that and what you could do to fix it, because it is definitely making it harder for you. And then right here, you're on these spitefuls. You should be killing this dark blade. The dark blade dies. You should be running past these spitefuls. I don't know why you're still way back here. Oh, because you guys are about to pull the boss. So I guess this is fine. Getting some insanity. You're at 100 insanity going into this boss fight, which is pretty good. You want at least like 70 if you can before you enter void form, before you start a boss fight. Okay, so like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, your single target damage is kind of what you're banking on with this build. So this is that moment. This is where your single target damage really needs to pull through if you're going to do good overall damage. So we'll go back just a tad to see how your opener goes. So what you should do is Vampiric Touch, Shadow Word Pain, and then Night Fae, so Fae Guardians, and then Mindbender, Shadow Word Death, Mind Blast, Void Form. As soon as you get into Void Form, you should be popping your PI, your Potion, and your Ruby, unless you're saving your Invisibility Potion, right? Because a lot of people like to do the Invis skip, in which case you don't pop your damage potion here. But you go into Void Form, and then you should be popping PI and Ruby, and then it should be just your basic single target rotation. So it should be Mind Blast. So it should be Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Devouring Plague. Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Devouring Plague. Basically like that, as long as you're not capping Insanity. In which case you would do Devouring Plague before you Mind Blast. But we'll see how it goes. So Vampiric Touch, Shadow Word Pain, good. Next we want to see a Fae Guardians, which it is, good. Your next cast should be a Mindbender, which it is. And then you cast a Devouring Plague here. Not a horrible idea, actually, because you're capped on Insanity right now. So I honestly don't mind that. It's just one global. And then you cast a Shadow Word Death. And then it should be a Mind Blast. And then you cast another Devouring Plague. I don't love that. You should be just saving that Insanity. You're better off capping Insanity for half a second in your Void Form, so that you get maximum value of your Mindbender in your Void Form. But instead you cast Devouring Plague here, and then a Shadow Crash. You're just delaying the time it takes to get you into Void Form. So those are two globals that you shouldn't be using. A Mind Blast again. I wonder, did you cancel the other Mind Blast? So Vampiric Touch, Shadow Word Pain, Fae Guardians, Mindbender, Devouring Plague, Shadow Word Death, Mind Blast. Does this Mind Blast go off? It does not. Okay, so let's see why it didn't go off. Oh, you just interrupted it. You moved. And you cast a Shadow Crash. Yeah, so if you look right here, this is your Mindbender. This is how much time you have left for your Mindbender being active. It's at 8 seconds, and you're just now getting into Void Form. If instead of that, you pop Mindbender, and then you do your Shadow Word Death, Mind Blast, and then you're immediately into Void Form, your damage will go up significantly. Because, like I said before, Void Form gives you full benefit of your mastery, which you already have because you have 3 dots on this guy. But it also gives you increased spell damage, right? So it's like something like 20% increased spell damage. So being in Void Form just means that your spells are going to hit 20% harder all the time, right? So when you're in Void Form, your Mindbender's auto attacks are going to be 20% stronger. Every rift that you generate is going to be 20% stronger. Your Shadow Crash is going to do 20% more damage. All your Devouring Plague ticks, all your other dot ticks are going to do 20% more damage. especially with Lust right here and your Mindbender, you should be getting into Void form as soon as possible, right? Instead, you barely get into it right here, and there's 7 seconds left. And also, you cast a Mind Blast right as you get into Void form. That should be a Void Bolt instead. You cast 2 Mind Blasts back to back, like I mentioned earlier. I don't know why people love doing that so much. I mean, it does give you 2 Shadow Flame Rifts, which is nice. But if you Void Bolt first, even if you Void Bolt, Mind Blast, that's better than just Mind Blast, Void Bolt. But I would suggest you do Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Devouring Plague, right? Because you're at 100 insanity. Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Devouring Plague. Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Devouring Plague. Because overall, that's going to do more damage than those 2 back-to-back Void Bolts. And then you cast 2 back-to-back Devouring Plagues. I mean, not Void Bolts, Mind Blasts. Yeah, so this is not a horrible single target rotation. But if you look at the damage meters, also you don't have PI or your Ruby running at this moment because they're on cooldown. But if you look at the damage meters, you guys popped Lust, right? So Shadow Priest is by far the strongest single target spec in the game right now. So with Lust and 2 of your big cooldown things, you should at very least be second on this damage meter and certainly not be this far behind, right? You're like 1.6k ahead of the Rogue, and then you're significantly farther behind the Death Knight, who has these 2 Stoneborns, so it's hard to really say anything about that. But the Fire Mage is also obliterating you, right? So yeah, if you can fix that single target rotation just a little bit, that'll bring your damage up as well. Oh, it looks like I just barely read this. It says PI and Trinket on your 6 key. So it looks like you have your PI and your Trinket macro together. I've mentioned this in other videos, but I think that's a mistake. I think you want to be able to use your Ruby without using your PI and the other way around as well. And you're holding on to PI right here. Maybe you're holding it for your Mindbender. If that's the case, that's not a horrible idea. But if you're just holding it because you don't realize it's up or you don't think it's worth using, then you're wrong. And you should be using it here instead. A Shadow Word Pain right here, good. Your Mindbender just came off cooldown. Oh, so yeah, you were holding it for your Mindbender. That's not bad. The only reason that might not be ideal is because this boss is pretty much dead. So if your tank can pull the next pack quickly, then that's not a horrible thing. And actually, it's not a horrible thing because your PI just barely fell off, right? You had like 2 seconds left on it. So yeah, not bad. Actually, a pretty good decision, I think, in the moment. You pull another Stoneborn right here, and this other pack, which is a little weird. And then you Vampiric Touch both of them. Oh, actually, you Vampiric Touch one of them. The other Obliterator doesn't have Vampiric Touch on it. And then you get a bunch of Ankle Biters. So right here, I would pop Void Form and just start Searing Nightmare spamming. Don't worry about anything else. A Mind Seer. Oh yeah, especially if you're bringing these Groundskeepers in. This is big time AoE damage. So Void Form, Shadow Crash, which is not up, and then a bunch of Searing Nightmares. So Mind Seer, Searing Nightmare. I don't know why you felt the need to Power Word Shield yourself right there. You were not really in danger. So let's see. Yeah, so you don't have any dots on you or anything. Nothing's targeting you. The only thing that happens is one of these Ankle Biters runs at you, I think, and you Power Word Shield yourself because you're afraid or something. Yeah, like this Ankle Biter jumps at you or something. I don't know what makes you think that you need a Power Word Shield here, but you don't. It's a wasted global. It does 0 damage, right? Shadow Crash. Oh, right as you lose your Void Form, which means it's going to do less damage. And then, yeah, just a bunch of Searing Nightmare spam. You're targeting a Groundskeeper, which is okay. And then as these Spitefuls start spawning, you should be finishing off the Groundskeepers, which it looks like you're doing. And then you can ignore the Spitefuls, or you can, use them to pad But if you're trying to time the key as fast as possible, you would skip all these guys and just run on to the next pack. Oh, but I guess you have to invis pot. So yeah, you should kill those as quickly as possible. Oh, you don't have to invis pot because you're gonna shroud. Okay. Well, in that case, if you were gonna shroud, then yeah, I guess you do still have to finish killing those guys before you can shroud. Okay, so this is another moment where your single target damage is going to be very important. So you're about to get your second to last prideful because you're going to do this slasher. I would pop Mindbender on this guy right now, and you do, which is good. Shadow Word Death, Mind Blast, Devouring Plague. Nice, and you're holding on to your Void Form. That's exactly what I would do as well. So that you have it right when the boss fight starts. Although, if we go back just a little bit and we look at when you started this pull, so you very first start this pull, you start casting on him at 1704. We need to keep that in mind because if it takes a minute and a half for you to start the boss fight, then you should have used your Void Eruption here as well. It will almost certainly take a full minute for you to kill this and the Pride, but will it take you a minute and a half is the real question. So when we pull the boss, we need to check the timestamp and see if it's more than 1834. Because if it is, like I said, you should have used your Void Eruption as well. So it's been 30 seconds already, and the slasher's not even dead. Shadow Word Death here would be great. Anytime. If you wanted to Shadow Word Death, that would be awesome. I wouldn't mind it at all. You're almost to a minute. It took 50 seconds for you guys to kill that slasher. And now you're on the prideful. Your Mindbender's about to come back off cooldown. You should be holding it for the boss because you definitely don't have another minute before the boss. Make sure you're dodging these prideful lines. That's good. Your Vampiric Embrace is up. You could pop it for this because you're not really going to get a whole lot of use out of it on this boss fight. Oh, and you do use it. Nice. So let's see. Yeah, so right now, 1835. It's been a minute and a half since you pulled that slasher. If you had used your Void Eruption on pull on that slasher, it would be coming off cooldown right now. So you lost a use of your Void Eruption, which is going to mean that you do less damage overall. So next time you run a Halls of Atonement 19 with Spiteful Grievous Fortified with this exact group, assuming things are very similar to this, you should be using Void Eruption on that slasher instead of saving it for the boss. Because you'll use it on the slasher, you guys will kill that, you'll kill the prideful, and it'll be ready for when you pull the boss. Okay, so let's see how you manage this boss fight. Echelon dives out of here. What I like to see is you stand on the edge up until he casts the throw blood thing. So you want to bait it on the edge so that it's not in the middle where everybody's standing. And then, yeah, you just do your single target rotation. So let's see. Should be a Vampiric Touch right now. Shadow Word Pain. Fey Guardians. Mindbender. Oh, you PI right after your Fey Guardians. That's probably just like 3 or 4 globals too early. It's still fine. It's just not the most optimal use. I would just hold on to that button until you get into Void Form. But then you Mindbender, Shadow Word Death, Mind Blast, a Shadow Crash. I usually save my Shadow Crashes on this fight in particular for when the ads come out and come in, because you're going to do way more damage with it that way. And those ads need to die really quickly. And that's a great time to Searing Nightmare a couple times. Oh, and then you have that targeting problem again. So if we just go back a little bit, you're on Echelon, and now you're targeting your tank. So again, I don't know what's making you do this, but this is something you need to get figured out because you're wasting globals. Okay, so this stone call right here. Also, you're still not in Void Form. This is not good. So let's go back and see what the rotation was. So Vampiric Touch, Fey Guardians, Shadow Word Death, Mind Blast, Shadow Crash, and then you start mind flaying. Why? What's the point of this mind flay? Because when I'm thinking about it, the only thing I can think of is like what does mind flay do? Mind flay can give you dark thoughts procs. It can give you dissonant echoes procs, but you're not running dissonant echoes. So you might be trying to get a dark thoughts proc here, but I don't know why you would. You should be in void form right now. But instead you mind flay. For the full duration, you do get a dark thoughts proc, and you use it, and you're just spamming mind flay. Then you fade when these guys come out, which is correct. And then you should be popping void form right now. Okay, it should have been popped already, but this is fine. So I guess one benefit to popping void form there, holding it and popping it on those ads, is that you get the crit from Ancient Madness on all those ads. But that's a super like padding kind of damage. The damage that matters on this boss fight is damage to the boss, right? This boss fight will only last as long as the boss is alive. It is important to kill those other ads, but the faster you kill this boss, the fewer waves of those ads you have to deal with, the quicker you can move on to other fights. So I would say don't hold that void form there, and instead you should be using it as your single target big damage cooldown to try and kill the boss. So right there you faded before that went off. I'm not entirely sure why. Searing Nightmare here would be good before the Shadow Crash, because your Searing Nightmares will put Shadow Word Pains on all these things, which means your Shadow Crash is going to do however much mastery you have % more damage. But instead you Shadow Crash before you Searing Nightmare spam. And then yeah, this stuff is going to live for a while. Kicking that stuff would be good as well. A Vampiric Embrace here would be helpful. This Curse of Stone goes out and you're out of the way, so that's good. You fade there again. I'm not sure why you're fading when there's no damage coming out. So the point of fade, there's 2 reasons why you would fade ever, right? Well, 3 reasons I'll say, because I'm going to go through every case. So the first reason why you would ever press fade is because it reduces all your threat to 0. So let's say there's a big pull, you're doing a ton of damage, the tank can't hold threat, everything turns and is going to come kill you. You press fade and you live, right? And it all goes back to fighting the tank. That's one case where you would press fade. The second case is when you're playing Translucent Image, like you are, as you can see in this buff in the top right. When you're playing Translucent Image and you press fade, you get a up to almost 10% damage reduction, depending on what item level the conduit is. You get a bunch of damage reduction, so it's a nice personal defensive cooldown, right? So if there's like a big mechanic that's going to hit you that happens once every 30 seconds or so, fade is really good for that because you take about 9%, 10% less damage from it. So that's another time where you would use fade is to reduce damage that you're about to take from an ability, right? And then the third time you would ever use fade is because it reduces your detection radius, the radius at which enemies can detect you. So if you fade, you could run by some stuff that you couldn't typically run by and it won't pull. But that is obviously not what you're trying to do here, right? So those are the only 3 situations that I can think of where you would want to use fade, and none of those apply here. So my guess is that you're using fade here as a personal defensive to try and reduce damage that you're going to take, but you're not taking any damage right now, right? So there's nothing hitting you. This blood torrent isn't going to hurt you at all. You took 0 damage, right? So that's a waste of fade, right? But then again, obviously, so when you're questioning whether you should have pressed it there or not, the answer is, well, first, did you get any value out of it? And the answer to that question, in that case specifically, is no. You didn't reduce any aggro, you didn't take any less damage, and you didn't reduce your detection radius for anything, so you got 0 use out of it, which means that you should not have pressed it, right? Because if you had pressed something else, you would have got value out of something else, right? Like a Devouring Plague, for instance. Then you're doing a ton of damage to the boss instead of doing nothing, right? So, okay, so you move in close, which is good. You pop Void Eruption here, and then immediately some Searing Nightmares. Your Shadow Crash just came off cooldown, so you should be using it right now. And then you get out of this thing, which is nice. You guys do manage to kill all those things in time. I don't know what your tank was doing right there. Your tank was standing in the slam dunk or whatever. That is definitely not ideal. And then, yeah, so you end up doing, 7k overall, or 7k DPS to this boss, right? 6k, it looks like. 6.9k, basically 7k. Your single target damage to this boss could have been higher, right? I mentioned a couple ways that you could have changed your rotation to do more damage, and that would overall bring up your DPS. Right here, you press fade to not get aggro from these guys. That's good. And then I think you're going to try and... Oh, so you Vampiric Touch these guys. I was going to say I think you're going to try and interrupt them so they come in, but that doesn't seem to be the case. You get some nice use out of your Mindbender here. That's really good. So you get a Dark Thoughts proc, a Mindbender. Nice. So using that Dark Thoughts proc would be nice. And then you actually did a really good job right there. If I go back a little bit. So when this stuff gets all spread out like this, you have to choose a target, right? Because your Searing Nightmare is going to hit stuff near a different target, right? So which of these 5 mobs is the best mob for you to be casting Searing Nightmare on? Or Mind Seer, so that you can get Searing Nightmare on as many mobs as possible? I think the answer is this triangle mob right here, because especially if these Gargants, if the tank starts to pull these Gargants back towards these Houndmasters, because these 2 Houndmasters are close enough that Searing Nightmare will hit both, and as long as these Gargants stay close enough, you can get damage on all 5, right? And you end up doing that. So you switch targets to this triangle guy, and you start Searing Nightmaring him, and these Gargants had Ursouls on them, and so they get pulled back. This guy should be kicked, by the way. These guys get pulled back, which means they're close enough for your Searing Nightmare to hit them. So actually, this is like really, really good. This is like really high level stuff you're doing right here. If this is completely intentional, which I'm sure it is, right? So yeah, really, really good. The second best choice would be to Mind Seer one of these Gargants as they're running around, because these guys aren't going to move, and you're better off hitting 3 targets than 2. But this is actually like super, super nice because you get it on all 5. And then yeah, even with the Dragon's Breath right there, and now they're getting a little far away, so you switch targets to the Gargants. Wow, that's actually so good. That's actually really, really good job right there. I would like to see you using a Shadow Word Death on one of these Gargants, maybe, or one of these Houndmasters or something as they get close to dying. It was also pretty sketchy right there. You got pretty low on HP. So using Fade or Desperate Prayer there would have been good. I didn't see... Your Desperate Prayer is on cooldown, so I'm guessing you pressed it. But then, yeah, again, you didn't use Shadow Word Death on a single thing there as it all died. So you're missing a bunch of damage from that. I bet if you went into your log and you looked at how much damage you got from Shadow Word Death compared to how much damage most high-end Shadow Priests get from their Shadow Word Death, yours would be a lot lower just because you're not using it to execute things. And granted, it's better to use it to execute things when you're playing Death and Madness, and you're not, but it is still good without Death and Madness, so you should be using it. A Shadow Crash right after Void Form, again, really good, but then 2 Mind Blasts, which makes it really bad. Right, 2 Mind Blasts back to back, like I've said before, not exactly what you want to be doing right there. You want 2 Searing Nightmares, or even a Searing Nightmare, Mind Blast, Searing Nightmare, and then maybe another Mind Blast or a second Searing Nightmare, whatever. So you guys should be finishing this Dark Blade and then moving on to the next boss. I'm sure your tank is going to want to pull both of these Stoneborns. If you were playing Karain, you could put a Shadow Word Pain on one of those Stoneborns before it gets turned to the other side for the crit. And then, yeah, you move into this next boss, and you don't have your cooldowns up. So your Mindbender is about to come off cooldown, but you don't have Void Form yet. And you do have your Power Infusion and your Ruby. So what I would do is save your Power Infusion and your Ruby and your Mindbender for when your Void Form comes up right here in a couple seconds, which it looks like you're going to do. Also, I was testing this before. I'm pretty sure you don't get First Strike if you hit those Ghostly Parishioners. But that's something that I'm not positive. I'm pretty sure, though, I was doing this Halls of Atonement the other day, and I'm pretty sure when I was hitting those guys with like a Shadow Word Pain, it wasn't giving me the crit bonus. But that's something you might want to look at if you're playing Karain in the future. Try hitting one of those guys with a... oh, and there's something I want to mention right there. Yeah, try hitting one of those Ghostly Parishioners with a Shadow Word Pain and see if it gives you the First Strike bonus for the crit. But the other thing I wanted to say right there is you were having a really hard time casting your Shadow Crash. If you watch, right now you're pressing it and it doesn't go off and it doesn't go off, and then you cast other stuff and still not going off. That's because there's an invisible wall right here, and your Shadow Crash is on a macro to target the ground, and so you're actually targeting up on this wall instead of out here on the ground where you're trying to target. It's kind of hard to explain because it's a three-dimensional world with a two-dimensional picture, right? But if you look at this gate and extend the wall above the gate, your cursor is actually targeting the wall above the gate, not actually the floor where the boss is. So the way you would fix that is you just turn your camera so that this gate isn't in your line of sight to the floor, right? So that your mouse is actually over the floor instead of over this gate. But that's something that's like not very obvious and hard to pick up. But you like moved out of the way, and even then your Shadow Crash didn't go off because you have that same problem. There, you finally get a Shadow Crash when you're finally like away from that gate. So yeah, you saved all your cooldowns for you to use them at the same time, and you're like barely beating the Fire Mage right now, and the DK is obviously a long ways ahead of you guys because he had the Stoneborns. But typically, if it's like a high fortified key and I have all my stuff lined up, I usually end up still, even with a holy paladin who will use Ashen Hollow and both Stoneborns. Usually a Shadow Priest can still beat them in single target on this fight. And you're actually 4th right now on the meters. So there are a couple of things that you could have done. You're lacking on single target here, is what I'm trying to say, pretty big time. And that's like, single target damage is like what Shadow Priest does well, and your build specifically is geared towards single target damage. And then right here, this is kind of a hard room to deal with. You should be Searing Nightmaring several things. You pop your Mindbender and you're trying to get a lot of rifts out, which is okay, I guess. But mostly Searing Nightmare is where you're going to really thrive in this room. You should be going towards the front to get some of those other Tormented Souls. Unless you guys already plan to have somebody else be doing those ones at the front, but it looks like nobody's hitting them. Yeah, like on the left there's a ton of Tormented Souls left. A Shadow Crash onto those would be really good at this point. Yeah, so decent, I guess. I'd put Vampiric Touch on those last 2 Tormented Souls, and then I'd start focusing this main guy. You could even kill one of those tormented souls with a Shadow Word Death. That'd be great. But yeah, like this is padding right here big time, because the Inquisitor guy is going to cast that Dark Calling or whatever, Dark Communion, and if those Tormented Souls aren't dead, it's going to give him more health, right? So the Tormented Souls are your priority target in this room. You shouldn't be hitting this main dude, and especially none of the manifestations until after every single Tormented Soul is dead, and then you can start hitting this main dude and the manifestations. And really what you should be doing is hitting the main dude and cleaving the manifestations, which you end up doing a little bit of. But right now, your damage, 9.9k, 9.8k, most of that, not most of that, but some of that is pad and is not actually helping you guys finish the key quicker, right? So if you're trying to do like a plus 20 and you are fearing that you're not going to make it in time, You need to stop worrying about doing really high overall damage and start worrying about doing high damage to the things that need to die quickly, right? So like this Inquisitor guy, he needs to die ASAP, and the way he dies is if you kill all the Tormented Souls. So you need to kill all the Tormented Souls as fast as possible, and then kill the Inquisitor as fast as possible. It doesn't matter how much you hit those manifestations. They're really not very dangerous, and they're not stopping you from continuing the dungeon, right? So that's something that a lot of people, I think, need to realize as well. Your overall damage could be 4k, but you could time a 24 if you did 4k overall damage, but it was to all the correct targets at all the right time. And really, that is probably exaggerating, because there are, like, the damage checks are so high in those high keys that you have to be doing more than that. But you shouldn't be worried about just hitting as many things as possible, right? There are like priorities that you should have. Like this Prideful needs to die ASAP. If there's anything else that you're fighting while you're fighting this Prideful, ignore it. This Prideful needs to die as soon as possible, right? So you guys do manage to kill this Prideful. You guys heal yourselves up a little bit. And then again, we're back to a single target boss fight, right? So you've got 6 seconds, 9 seconds left on your Mindbender. So you can probably... Also, you should use your combat potion right here, but you can probably get a couple... You're probably going to have to Mind Flay a little bit before you get into Void form, because your rotation is going to be a little bit weird with having 9 seconds left on your Mindbender. So it should be Vampiric Touch, Shadow Word Pain, then you Mind Blast, Fey Guardian's PI, and then you Mindbender, Shadow Word Death, Mind Blast, Void Form. You moved a lot right there. You didn't need to. If we go back just a little bit, you see, so right now, if you're watching, so at the beginning of the boss fight, you should pay attention to where all of these Denathrius statues are facing, right? So this guy's facing kind of down this way. I look at their feet. So this guy's feet are pointing this way. This guy's feet are pointing this way. These guys' feet are pointing this way and that way, right? So then, as soon as he chooses one and turns it, you can kind of see, like, right now, it's going to go this way. Because it turned clockwise, it's going to go across this way. It's not even going to hit you. You don't have to move here at all. But instead, you run left a little bit, then you run right. Okay, I was wrong. It was going to hit you. So, you're right that you needed to move. But, so let's see real quick. Just so I don't look like a total idiot. Okay, so yeah, it's pointed right at you. You turn and you face it, you run left, and then you run back right. You really just need to move a little bit. So I'll take back a lot of what I said right there, except the key takeaway is you don't have to be this far away to dodge this thing. You just have to be barely outside of it. Like where this Fire Mage is, that's where you should be, right? That distance away from this line. And then you keep running a little bit, and then you go back to fighting. Shadow Priest has a really hard time casting important spells while they're moving, right? So you need to try to move as little as possible and make your movement really good. Like, I don't know why you're moving right there. And then going into this, popping a Vampiric Embrace right here would be really good. Nobody's soaking one of those, which is not good. Fade right here would be good. Desperate Prayer right here would be good. Although you seem to be fine, so Desperate Prayer right here is probably unnecessary. You need to dodge this for sure. You moved again a lot, probably unnecessarily. It's good to move out of the way, but then once you're out of the way, stop. And then make sure you know where out of the way is, and then make sure you move appropriately. Don't just move because something crazy is going to happen. Oh, and this is a really nice move right here. Actually, I really like this. So if we go back just a little bit, this is going to be the very end, sorry. But if we go back just a little bit, this Fire Mage, he's this guy, he's getting trucked by this Ritual of Woe. So you run in the way and you press Dispersion. This is a really nice play, actually. I really like this a lot. Because it takes a lot of pressure off your healer, and you can survive this really easily with this Dispersion. Like, he popped Cauterize. He's taking a ton of damage right there. So yeah, that's a really good situational awareness play. So yeah, you've had a lot of really good moments where you're playing like really really well, but there are just a couple of really small that aren't actually really small, but really like basic um, things that you need to get down. And once you add those things to your repertoire, you're going to be a big time blaster. I can see it because you're already doing a lot of stuff right. So there's just a couple of the really simple basics of Shadow Priest that you need to get right, and then you'll start blasting like crazy. Um, so yeah, hopefully that helped. I hope again it wasn't too aggressive. I hope you got something good out of it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Feel free to join my Discord, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.